Welcome to the second in a series of webinars that we hope will be useful. Let me just hide that. There we go. Sorry, just getting set up. So welcome to the second Bridges webinar in a series that we hope will be useful to think about some of the challenges that we're facing at the moment, and also as another way to connect as a community of practice and to share ideas. So we did our first webinar 2 weeks ago, and we looked at resilience and how you could build resilience in healthcare teams, because it felt like we kind of needed to do that. And at the end of that, many people were talking about triage. So this webinar is on triage, but not just triage. We're thinking a bit more broadly about how you can support self-management in those short one-off interactions. A few process pointers. I know we're all getting more familiar with doing these types of webinars, but if you can please mute your mic just to make sure that we can hear everything. There will be chance at the end to unmute your mic and we can have more of a discussion. We are recording this session, so the good news is that it's available probably tomorrow. We'll get it up onto YouTube, and if you've got any friends or colleagues that have missed the session, then they can watch it. The bad news is that you're potentially being recorded, so if you do type anything in the chat window or if your image comes up, then you are being recorded. Please do feed your questions and share your thoughts in the chat window. So if you haven't already opened up the chat window, it's a really good time to do that now. It's a button down at the bottom and it'll bring it up on the right hand side. And we will use that as we go through, so you do need that open. This is a new process. We've done a few webinars now, but it's still quite a new process for us. So we'd really welcome your feedback, either in the chat window or if you email us afterwards, that would be great. Also, a plug for our Facebook page, another really good way to connect as a community of practice. If you go to Facebook and put Bridges Self-Management Community, you'll see our page. It's an active group and it's growing, and it's a really nice place to share ideas. The session will be about 30 minutes and then about 30 minutes for discussion. So we'll be done by 8:30, but if you do have to leave before then, that's fine. I'm not going to be offended. I know we've all got various things going on wherever we are this evening, so that's fine. And as I said, it's been recorded, so if you miss any, you can always catch up later. Pardon me. So, a quick welcome to the Bridges team. So this is who you've got joining you this evening. Scott, whilst I choke to death, I'll let you introduce yourself. So Scott needs to be unmuted. Kelly, please. Hi, Scott.
Good evening, everyone. This is a bit like welcome to your flight crew, isn't it? Hi, I'm Scott. I'm the Communications and Engagement Manager. I also trained as a physio as well, but shortly after I graduated as a physio, I suffered quite a major stroke. As a result of the stroke, I lost my vision and suffered quite severe mobility impairments as well. So kind of my role within Bridges is to kind of try and provide a bit of the kind of patient perspective to everything that we do. So that's kind of one of my roles here this evening as well, is to try and kind of merge the kind of the clinician and patient perspective. So.
And you've got me, so my name's Katie Campion. I'm the co-production and innovation lead at Bridges. I'm a physio by trade, by background, and I've done a bit of research. And I've been working with Bridges for quite a long time, helping to deliver some of the training, but I just joined in a more full-time capacity in January, which has been really exciting. And we're really lucky to also have Joss with us today. So he is a fantastic senior community OT who's over in Jersey, and was really helpful in putting together this webinar. So he's got some examples that he's going to go into later on. And as always, we have Kelly, who is squirreling away in the background. She's our operations manager, and she will be gathering all of your thoughts in the chat window, and hopefully if there's any technical issues, then she might help solve those. So, just as a bit of an icebreaker, what I'd like you to do first of all is just type in the chat window what's one word for how you're feeling or for what's going on with you, for where you are right now. So we'll break the chat window ice. change, tired, optimistic, overworked, busy, intrigued, waiting, frazzled, busy, overwhelmed, impotent, anxious, excited, weary, recuperating, overwhelmed again, restless, excited. Okay, you can keep those coming, anticipating change, but also impotent very much. Yeah, okay. Emotional yo-yo. Yeah, someone earlier on today said the Corona coaster, which I hadn't heard before, but you probably have. So we'll carry on. The outline of the session. So we're going to look at the context. So why triage, and why look at those short remote interactions when we're thinking of self-management support, and what the current situation is, which to us feels actually quite different to 2 weeks ago in some ways, in other ways not really at all. We're going to look at 3 of the Bridges self-management principles, and the ones that are most relevant and we think will be most useful to you when you're thinking about triage conversations. We've gathered some triage top tips from many of you, so thank you for your input. And Josh has got some case studies for us, so that will help to illustrate what this looks like in practice. And then we've got plenty of time for discussion and sharing ideas at the end. So, setting the scene. So 2 weeks ago, we did our first webinar on resilience, and it seemed at that time that triage conversations with patients were pretty much one of the few interactions that people were having with patients. So many community services has been dismantled and kind of reconfigured very rapidly into rapid response type services. So facilitating hospital discharge and preventing admissions. There were some remote consultations happening, more so in the private sector than what we heard, because there were smaller teams, more able to kind of experiment and see how things go. There was definitely this sense of feeling in limbo, which maybe is continuing to some extent, but this kind of waiting period, waiting for whatever's coming in the future. 2 weeks on, more remote consultations seem to be happening, so we're getting a bit more familiar with how to do those. And I know that there are some more face-to-face consultations happening, so particularly some ESD services have just started to get going again. But by and large, patients are very much still self-managing because they have to. Whether they are doing that well or not well, they are self-managing. And that's why we think it's so important at the moment. The other thing to consider, and the reason I've put this picture up, which says drive carefully, come back soon, is because I think there's also an opportunity when we're interacting with patients now to really sow the seeds of self-management, so that when they do presumably come back into the service at some point, if they need rehab in the future, that they do that at the right time, and that they're kind of prepared and they're coming into that service feeling geared up to make the most of it, because presumably we're going to have quite a high amount of demand. We're going to have to think about things differently. So we started putting this together and had lots of discussions around triage. The most important thing was the conversation. So from speaking with all of you, we know that capacity, referral criteria and pathways are all very fluid. We know, let me click there. We know that your services vary a lot. So for some of you, triage would be a conversation with the referrer to get a bit more information to decide whether you would take a case on or not. For others, that conversation, that kind of triage conversation, is with the patient to find out more information about risk and again whether they need to be seen face to face. For us today, what we're really interested in is those conversations with patients. So triage conversations with patients. So we're looking at how self-management principles can be embedded into those short video and phone interactions, given that those are largely the main interactions that are happening with patients and that they're having to self-manage. So we know that triage is usually the last thing to be designed at the first point of contact, and there's probably at the moment, given all of those changes and that fluidity, there's probably a lot of questions around service design and how you respond to those changes in capacity and demand and referrals. And maybe at the end would be a really good good time for, I know there's a lot of expertise out there that have tuned in, which is fantastic. So maybe you could share some of the ideas, and in your service, what's working, what's a bit more challenging. That would be really helpful. So it's a very difficult, strange kind of time, but there are some opportunities, and certainly I was really pleased to hear at the end of the last webinar, some of you talk quite enthusiastically about some of the changes, some of the kind of rapid innovations that you've put into your services. So we have seen rapid implementation of remote consultations. There do seem to be in a number of teams a kind of proper single point of access now that's really joined up health and social care. And in the last community team that I worked in, there were 2 single points of access, which kind of drove me a little bit crazy. There seems to be an ability to connect with each other and to share what works and what doesn't. This evening is a really good example, and it also feels like there's a real willingness to work together, which is really, really heartwarming. There's a focus on supporting self-management because we have to, and we hope that that will continue in the future beyond the current situation. And as Sue pointed out last time, already the power has shifted more with the family and the patient because it has to. So that real partnership working and power sharing is having to happen because we're not able to go and see people face to face. So already the clinician is more in the kind of helper role, and the patient has a more starring role. And I hope that some of that power sharing and that sharing of control continues longer term as well. So a quick recap of self-management support. I know many of you will have done Bridges training, but it's useful just to recap over what we're talking about when we say self-management support. So self-management includes all the actions taken by people to recognise, treat and manage their own healthcare. And that could be independently of or in partnership with the healthcare system. So they may be really great at self-management and they may come back through the service a number of times, and that may be totally appropriate. But someone who is self-managing really, really well will do that at a time that is most appropriate to make the best use of that service. We know that people feel more confident and engaged when they're encouraged to self-manage by professionals, so supporting self-management really is key to prioritising person-centred care. This is Manuel. So he had a traumatic brain injury. He was part of our traumatic brain injury project. He was an artist studying at Goldsmiths, fell off his bike, had a brain injury, and would be what you would typically describe as being kind of one of the walking wounded. So made quite a good, quick physical recovery, but had a number of challenges to deal with further down the line. And this is what he thinks of in terms of self-management support.
When you're in a situation when you're powerless, and you're facing uncertainty, I think it's important to nurture hope in you. And the professional that follows the patient in that sense and points the good, the accomplishments, the small victories, because that's what keeps you going.
So I think the key things that Manuel mentions were uncertainty. So if someone has a stroke or a brain injury, or they're going through an acute episode of a relapse, then there is a huge amount of uncertainty about what the future might look like. And that's when things are business as usual. So at the moment, there is an enormous amount of uncertainty that we're all having to deal with. And as Manuel said, one of the really important things during that time is to nurture hope. So those big hopes, aspirations for the future. And this, I think, links quite nicely with the webinar a couple of weeks ago looking at resilience, because we talked about how this sense of kind of global uncertainty can feel like grief, like a grief process and a grief reaction as we're adapting and getting used to losing many, many things that we're used to. And one of the really positive things that you can focus on to get through that is to find a new sense of purpose or meaning. The other thing that Manuel mentioned was small victories. And you're going to hear the term small steps or small victories a few times through this session. And that's because they really are important to build that sense of confidence. Those small successes and helping people to recognise those is really, really important, particularly right now. The other thing that I thought might be useful to think of for you is that self-management engagement really is a continuum. It's a spectrum. So the people that you're talking to, the patients that you're talking to at the other end of a screen, at the other end of a phone line, could be in a variety of different places in terms of their self-management skills or self-management engagement. And hopefully this table kind of helps to describe that a little bit. So you may get on a call with someone, and at the other end you've got a patient who is motivated, really proactive, and then the strategies for supporting self-management would be these things in the top line. So information giving, supporting existing ideas, maybe helping people plan ahead for setbacks and setting new targets. At the other end of the spectrum, you may get on a call with someone who is really feeling quite overwhelmed, and this is the case at the bottom. So in that case, self-management support could be encouraging thinking about what they love doing and what could be one small step towards that. And then in the middle, maybe you've got someone who expresses ideas, but they're not really confident to put that into action. For those types of people, you might be giving more regular support if you have the capacity or ability to do that, in order to build on ideas to move forward. So you might introduce tools or methods to help to motivate, things like peer support, keeping a diary of progress and video, photos of progress, encouraging ideas and goals, and helping to break down actions to achieve a goal in those small steps. Again, small steps keep coming through. So this is what we call bridges on a slide. So if you may be tuning in and you've never heard of bridges before, or you've not done bridges training in your service. So bridges is a self-management approach. It's an evidence-based unifying framework for personalized self-management support. So what all of that means is that it looks really different depending on where it's put into place, depending on the context. So if you look at those circles, we have the patient and the family at the center. Then you have self-efficacy. Now this is a psychological theory. Self-efficacy is your belief in your ability to do a particular thing at a particular moment in time. So it's a confidence belief. If you've got really high self-efficacy about doing something, you're more likely to have a go at doing it and putting lots of effort. So self-efficacy is really important when we're thinking about self-management support and people having that confidence to continue on under their own steam when they're at home in isolation. That then gives us 11 principles. So 11 principles around supporting self-management in rehabilitation. And then how that's implemented looks different in various different contexts. So we've done projects in the acute setting and community settings. And the things that we find really help to embed bridges of these 4 boxes on the outside. So quality improvement, co-design, that's the bit that I find really exciting as co-production lead, where you're really working in partnership with patients. So you're not just consulting them, but you're really working together to find solutions. You've got champions. So bridges champions are usually people on the ground who do training and are really enthusiastic and really passionate about it, and they help to really drive change in their service. And then the other thing that helps is MDT working, which generally in this country it's an ethos that's been around for a long time, so it's usually quite useful, working quite well. So this approach, we have a 5-stage approach, so 5 stages to the whole process. And the reason that we have that is because we're looking not at just changing language, but a whole systems change. So if you have self-management support embedded in your service, then that's what will sustain it. And it really is a change in culture and a change in all of your processes so that it's really ingrained in the way that we're working. This is different to what you might imagine as a more traditional self-management intervention. So something like a group where people go along, where patients go along and learn various self-management skills. The stumbling block with those types of approaches is that they tend to be attended by people who are already really good at self-management. So they've got high health literacy, they're usually white, middle class and female. So they have very limited reach. So actually the people that really need self-management support aren't getting it. So Bridges is a self-management support that's personalised to the needs and circumstances of individuals, because you guys are all implementing it, and it can be done at any time. So although what we're talking about this evening is around those short triage conversations, we're talking about mostly language in this particular session, which can also be really relevant to the acute setting. So if you're thinking about having to discharge someone quite rapidly, using a couple of questions to get them to think ahead and problem solve and think about, well, what are the first few steps that you could do when you go home, could be really useful. Now, that's enough of me waffling on. So I'm going to hand over to Scott. What we've done is pull out the 3 principles that we think are going to be the most useful for you at the current time period.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Katie. I'm going to talk you through the 3 principles that we've chosen. We've also, so we've sent you out the principles ahead of time, the 11 principles. We've also sent you out a list of catchphrases that you might find useful to help you introduce these principles to some of your patients as well. So the first principle that we've chosen to kind of introduce to you today is our 5th principle, which is using hopes and fears as a source of direction and motivation. So this one is really useful if people struggle to identify goals, or it's really helpful to help people quickly uncover their priorities as well. Some clinicians get a bit worried sometimes if they're particularly having to discuss fears with people, particularly in quick interactions. But we tend to find that actually, if you don't discuss some of these fears with them, then you can't really get onto their, what they really need to kind of work on from a therapy point of view. So I'm going to give you a bit of an example from what's kind of my kind of fears and concerns are regarding me at the moment, because I'm also a patient as well. So one of the things that I'm kind of wrestling with at the moment is, how do I get my current exercise in terms of social distancing? So because I'm visually impaired, so I use a sighted guide to walk around. So with my wife and my young daughter, who's 17 months old, she's helpfully decided to start walking in the lockdown. So we walk like 2.5 abreast on the pavement, but in the area of southeast London where I live, the pavements are quite narrow. So trying to socially distance when you're kind of walking 2.5 abreast on the pavement is quite tricky. So that kind of my anxiety levels around that are kind of quite high. So my inclination is to maybe not go out and kind of take in my exercise, and perhaps leave it to my wife and daughter to go and do that instead. So kind of the catchphrase that we have kind of given you to kind of help introduce this to perhaps some of your patients is, what's one thing that's bothering you right now? And that's a really nice way to start introducing this as a kind of a question starter to your patients. So the second principle is our 6th principle, which is focusing on the small things, personal importance in the here and now. And this is kind of really the small steps of which Bridges is based. This is kind of the origin of our name and our logo. This is kind of how we build the mastery experiences that Katie was talking about earlier on, and the kind of self-confidence as well. It's really good. It's a really nice one to help people focus on when they're in isolation, and particularly if they've got limited resources as well. It's really good one to help people if they're getting overwhelmed and they've kind of set like a big goal for themselves, or they're getting overwhelmed by just the kind of current situation as well. So an example for me in this one at the moment is something that I faced quite early on in lockdown, is how do I plan my kind of work day when I'm living in a reasonably small 2-bedroom flat with my wife and daughter. So I'm working from home, living from home, and I'm sure this is something that a lot of you have kind of come up against. How do I juggle all of those things in a fairly small space? And so how do I break that quite big task down into smaller, manageable chunks so it doesn't overwhelm me too much? The kind of catchphrase that you can help to introduce this kind of question is, what's one small step that you could do today, tomorrow, or over the next few days? And the final principle that we wanted to introduce with you is our 7th principle, which is building on the kind of the patient or the family's existing self-management skills and experience. And this is a really good one to help the patient reflect on what they can do already. It also helps us to recognize that the patient comes with kind of existing self-management skills. It kind of helps again to build in the kind of mastery experience that Katie was talking about earlier on. So again, an example from my own point of view is you know, the kind of anxiety that again all of the kind of current coronavirus situation causes. You know, how I could quite easily let that overcome me. But one thing that I've had to really do is to draw upon the last 13 years of kind of managing my anxiety around kind of my condition and how do I problem solve my way around things. And, you know, so I've really had to draw on that wealth of knowledge that I've gained over that time to kind of, manage that anxiety. So the catchphrase that you can use in that instance is, how might you have done this in the past? So that's how you can try and introduce that question, that principle with your patients. So how do we kind of then put this into practice, or our triage tips, excuse me. So what we did is we went away and we spoke to some of our Bridges friends around, you know, what do they find useful in their services or their systems. And I just wanted to drop in a quick thank you to Tess, Vicky, Karen and Inez for their thoughts on this. And just wanted to also point out that these are just some ideas, you know, they're not the be all and end all of kind of how you kind of do this, but they are just some ideas. So the first one is that it's not just that data is key, but also stories are key as well. So it's key in evidencing any changes that we want to be made when services begin to get reconstituted as we come out of lockdown. You know, there are probably things that we have kind of quite liked about the way that we've kind of our new way of working, but there are also things that maybe we didn't enjoy from how we were working before. And it's really key that we draw on kind of data and kind of stories from patients about what they have experienced as to kind of how we proceed forward. The kind of senior members of the team being the ones to do the triage, that's kind of quite a self-explanatory one. Trying to get as much background as we can on patients before we go into the triage process. So this is a really good role for less qualified staff. It helps us to build up a good picture about a patient before the triage process, but it's important to remember it's not the whole picture. And just speaking from a patient point of view, it really helps to build up trust, because it shows that you've kind of been away and taken the time to find out about them before you've actually come into that interaction with the patient. The next one is kind of, I think is a really important one. It's about prepping them for the triage process. So it's a really good opportunity to get them to thinking about their situation and how they perhaps would like to proceed. And it's a really nice opportunity to introduce them to some of those Bridges principles that I spoke about earlier on. And this can be done in the form of maybe sending them out a leaflet or a questionnaire. It's also a nice way to kind of start sowing the seeds around things like service capacity as well, and begin to start introducing kind of expectation on what kind of things the services might be able to do kind of going forward as well. And the final one is trying to make sure that all relevant people are on the call or are in the triage kind of conversation. So that's kind of anyone that's going to be helping the patient, but also any other clinicians that might be involved with that person as well. And that's actually been made a little bit easier now by, you know, kind of the proliferation of conferencing tools, whereas before we would probably try and get all of kind of clinicians in the same physical space. Actually, with kind of the proliferation of conferencing software and tools, it's actually a little bit easier. So I'll hand back to Katie now.
That's great, Scott. Thank you. Out of interest, have you had any conversations over the telephone over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, so I actually had a conversation with a neurologist, a few weeks ago.
How was that? How did you feel?
It was an interesting one. I kind of felt like the neurologist kind of came into it with their own agenda, and the conversation with they kind of decided what they wanted to come out of it before the telephone consultation, really, and it was just a bit of a tick box exercise, really. Kind of, I came away from it feeling a bit like he could have done it without actually speaking to me.
So you're not listening particularly?
No, not really.
Okay, that's great, Scott. Thank you so much. So we reflected on what success looks like to us from a self-management point of view. If you have a conversation with someone, what does that look like if it goes well, if you're supporting self-management? It really is just a good conversation, and it increases self-efficacy. So that's that confidence belief, so that people feel more confident to continue under their own steam. And we're also really interested in behaviour change. So are people taking action? Are they feeling confident to try something at home on their own to self-discover? And also, do they know where to find support? And this isn't really about telling people about support that's available, but it's asking the questions so that the patient starts to think about where they could get support, whether that be financial, emotional, family. They're usually one of the best person to know where they can get that support from, but they might need a nudge from you. So I'm going to hand over now. Oh no, I've got one more thing. So what I'd really like to know from all of you is, to you, if you're having a triage conversation or a one-off conversation, so like an assess and treat, advice and assess conversation, what to you would success look like? So individually, but also to the patient and service. If you could just type again a couple of words in the chat window based on kind of how things have been going for you over the last couple of weeks. So what does a really good triage conversation look like to you? Repeat the catchphrases. Kay's saying we will repeat the catchphrases, and we've also sent them out to you in a PDF. Many more. Empowered and listened to, patient point of view, clear plan and outcome, confidence, good positive feedback, client spontaneously taking ownership. That's cool. Patient engages. Yeah. Client comes up with their own plan. That's always brilliant, isn't it? And that kind of mirrors what Scott was saying about agenda, like they've got their own agenda. Rapport, engaged goals, reduced anxiety, patient managing well, managing to progress. Client says you don't need to go. That's brilliant. Yeah, the great ideas there. Patient takes control. Increased confidence, therapeutic alliance, positivity. Okay, lovely. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Joss now. He's going to take us through just a couple of examples to show you what it looks like in practice. So just a couple of examples to show you what this might look like. Hi, Joss.
Hello. Okay, folks, welcome. Greetings from Jersey here. As Katie said earlier on, this is the time of COVID. And what that looks like is rapid change in how our services have been delivered or not delivered, reorganisation of services, staff and resources, some teams and services closed altogether, and some not really sure what they're meant to be doing at the moment. In Jersey, this has been coupled with a creaking single point of referral system that prior to COVID was producing poor referrals without any clinical reasoning. And suddenly, for me, here was the opportunity. Having had Bridges training in the past, I could see there was a way to change how things were done and for the better. And so I was put in charge of the screening and triage element for our community teams. So basically, occupational therapy and physiotherapy community teams were amalgamated, and we decided what would make a difference to the majority of people, and how could we stop really poor referrals clogging up our system. So what we changed was who was our first point of contact. Prior to COVID, we would spend hours trying to decipher poor referrals with the referrers. We stopped all of that. We now, largely, our first point of contact is with the individual being referred. And earlier on, there was a mention about nurturing hope. So drawing on the Bridges principles that Scott spoke about earlier, we started a conversation. So myself and my colleague Emily will ring up the patient themselves and essentially say, guys, what are your hopes and fears? What are the small steps that might bring around a bit of change now? What's going well for you? Activities and resources. And how do you feel about this referral that's been made about you? The other issue, and I think this is about what surprised me, was how willing these individuals I was contacting were willing to take a responsibility. And they really jumped at the chance to be part of the solution. Now, this may be a function of our clients not really wanting to see us because of COVID, or might it be because we're more open to listen? So first part of our screening and triage process is asking those questions, starting the conversation, knowing what's available to them, and then we do the boring bit, which is establishing the OT and physio baselines, and we have to do a COVID screen. So, rather than me talking a lot, let's let my clients do the talking. So we go on to 2 case studies. The first one was a self-referral for equipment. Now, this is a lady who's in her mid-50s, lives with her husband, had sudden onset spinal and leg pain 1 month prior to COVID lockdown. GP had referred to a consultant in outpatients. COVID restrictions closes down the window of opportunity for this lady to see the doctor. And all avenues for her had closed in order to go to seek out medical support. She basically had a lot of pain, and she reached out to us because we were about one of the only services that was actually still operational. My first contact with her, it was not about OT equipment. This was about a lady who was traumatized and was in pain and felt isolated. The first part of the conversation was hopes and fears. I got the fears. She was terrified that things were going to be awful for her and that she was doing irreparable damage because of the level of pain. So support was given on how she might re-access the consultant, and some reassurance given and some encouragement. And when I rang her back 3 days later, she had said, "Thanks for your advice. I rang the consultant. They spoke to me directly. I feel much better. I feel vindicated. I feel supported." And then we started talking about the occupational therapy equipment. She didn't want to see us, so we gave her the option of what sort of equipment she would be prepared to fit herself. And sure enough, she chose a few items. We did a no contact delivery visit, and her case has now been put on hold for other things when the COVID restrictions are lifted.
Just a little point, we've only got a minute or so left.
Okay, the second one was a social worker referral. Here we had some excellent reasoning on the referral, but the referral was on the proviso that occupational therapy fitted a shower before this lady could go home. Essentially, in this situation, what I did was ask the questions, hopes, fears, and expectations, found that the patient was motivated to return home, and the husband wanted her home. And so what we did was we mounted a joint OT physiotherapy rehab plan from where she was in a nursing home, and to enable them to do what their goals were. So what are these case studies about? It's about sense making. And so with sense making, part of the triage process and how I would see it is that you're teasing out what's important to the patient and asking those powerful questions that Scott mentioned earlier on. This is what's influenced the Bridges principles have influenced how I have made sense of those conversations. And so the use of the triage interaction can really support self-management and essentially transform problems into opportunities.
That's great, Just. Thank you very much. So we're nearly finished, so we're going to get on to discussion part soon. But just briefly, to kind of bring all of this together, Dr. Ella Clark and the Bridges team put together a video about 6 weeks ago when all of this started, when lockdown started, just to give you a few pointers to hopefully remember to make the most of those remote consultations. Sorry. Okay. So just to finish off, before we get on to the discussion, if you could just type what's one word for how you're feeling or for what's going on for you right now in the chat window. I'm getting you to do lots of work today, aren't I? Let's have a look. What have we got? Reassured, grateful, learn, reflective, motivated, inspired. That's cool. Reassured. And whilst people are still typing those in, just a reminder that this is the second in a series, so we've got another webinar in 2 weeks' time. So thank you for joining us, and we've got some very cool guest speakers coming up, so you don't have to listen to me again, which I'm sure is great. What we're going to do now, as we're getting the last few ideas, so questioning technique, motivated, we're going to open it up for a group discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen so I can see all of you again, which is great. So has anyone got anything that they want to say to kick off? Any thoughts, any questions, anything that's stuck in your mind, or any of that? We're going to pick on you. We've got people that we know we want to talk to and pick their brains.
Katie, it's Fiona. Hi, everybody. Well done to all three of you. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. Just to say, if you want to ask a question, are people just going to put it into the chat box, or are they going to, because if they put their hands up, you might be on the other page.
Yeah, there's too many of you. So yeah, if you pop it in the chat window, if you just put your name or put something in the chat window, and then we can come to you and you can unmute your mic and speak to us. We did hands up last time, but I think that's going to be too tricky to keep an eye on all of you. Do you want to pick on someone, Fiona?
Oh, I'm tempted to pick on our friend Derek Newman again.
Derek, aka Sue.
It's not Derek, it's Sue. And I don't know whether, Sue, you could put your camera on? Oh no, she's gone off to make a cup of tea.
Yeah,
tea
break.
I've put the camera on, but it doesn't seem to be coming up.
Yeah,
okay, good.
Now, for those of you that don't realise, Sue is listening to this very early in the morning because she's in New Zealand. And Sue, I just wondered if we could have your reflections on what you just heard, or if you've got any questions.
No, I guess I haven't got any questions, and I'd also like to say welcome to Sonia Veal that I see is joining us.
Yeah, I saw Sonia's name there.
So yeah, that's exciting. So Sonia and I can have a catch up later. Yeah, I like the idea about the triage process, about contacting the client first of all. So that's certainly a tip that I think I'd like to share with the team that I'm working with, you know, about how we make that initial contact with the client and get clarity around, you know, what they are finding difficult, not just what the referrer has sent in. I think that's quite a key point for me to take away. Yeah.
Thanks, Sue. I'd be interested to ask people how many of you have to sort of follow a script with your triage, or whether you have that scope within your triage session, or maybe your one-off session to go off script and ask more open questions in the way that Joss and Scott and Katie were talking about. Let's see if anyone wants to say anything.
I think you can just unmute. If you want to say something, we could just try it where you just unmute your mic, because I don't think everyone's going to shout over each other, are they? You look like a fairly well-behaved bunch. So if you want to chip in, just unmute your mic and chip in.
It's a bit.
Rashida, you said some really interesting things. Where are you? No.
I'll say something. Not that I'm doing triage anymore, really. But I think, Fiona, what you're saying about the script is quite an interesting thought. But certainly it's quite a daunting process for individuals being involved in doing the triage. And there's quite a kind of fear about getting it wrong and then putting something through that is either inappropriate for the person you've, especially even though multidisciplinary working works, that kind of shoved it over to the OT, or you shoved it over and it shouldn't have been, you know, or to a different team because that's not a neuro client and it should have been an elderly client. Or so there's quite a lot of trepidation, I think, when you, especially if you're new to it. And so that script is quite, I think, helpful to newer staff maybe for doing it. So it's finding that balance. And like you say, it's quite, I love the point you made in the slides about how it's the last thing to be thought about when you're planning services, and yet it's probably the most important, really. And how perhaps those scripts could be altered to meet better triaging processes, maybe. But getting rid of it entirely might be quite tricky as well. So I don't know if that's a thought to throw out to people.
I'll come back on that. What's really interesting is that we have a sort of a script, but quite a lot of the time we're actually removing huge amounts of work off our OTs and physios by asking those questions, because several of the referrals we've had where a consultant has just tacked in OT and physio to do a review at the end, what we actually find is the main difficulties for the individual is actually with the consultant and nothing to do with OT and physio. And so we have a very small amount, we don't have any work to do. So we're sort of putting bookends, the hopes and the fears as bookends to give people the permission to speak. So you don't have to have a tight script. It can just be as simple as, what are your hopes? What are your fears at this time? What's going well? What's not going so well? And in that, you get the solutions.
Evie, do you want to come back on that?
Hi everyone. Just a quick intro. I'm Evie and I'm a patient point of view here. Trauma and neuro and orthopedics and post-traumatic stress disorder, massive car accident. What I'm hearing here is all very interesting and it really resonates with me. And regarding these questionnaires, if I can just offer my humble point of view, I suppose I can kind of understand the importance of what you need to know, and I view it as a physiological, what you need to know about my injuries. So I suppose I would maybe expect these questions, but they're really tiring and really long. And if I'm thinking I have a very limited time to spend with you guys, and especially now when I need to speak to therapists or consultants or any medical professional, I am really aware of the time pressure, the availability. So for me, it would be more helpful if I have to support Joss in this. I need you to find out what's really important for me, because I feel I'm not wasting your time and we are working on something that's really important. Like my therapist still wants to get my arm up here. I can't. And it doesn't bother me. She's really focused. She's amazing. And she knows she can get it there one day. But she actually learned that I don't need my arm up here. What I'm actually really worried about at the moment is I'm really exhausted. And that I'm not going to see her. So I feel I'm letting her down. So by asking these questions, what's important? What are you worried about at the moment? What would you like to work on with me? Is really vital. It's more important for me than telling her I can walk 10 meters in 5 minutes time, and this is not relevant for me because I need to tell her what's important. So putting these questions first, I do believe will probably save all of you a lot of time, and me as well. And maybe in those questions and my answers, you probably find lots of answers to your other physiotherapy. I keep calling them physiotherapists, sorry, that's my Czech background. So all the therapy questions, so anything physiological is probably, and if it is important to me, I will tell you in those first few questions. I don't know if that helps.
I think you're kind of talking about how you marry up the two, isn't it? Ines wanted to give, where's Ines? Ines, hello.
I'm here.
Hi.
Yes, so as you know, I just moved to a new service in Bromley, just nearby home, and we actually set up a very quick service to support the discharges from hospital in different areas, so all the specialties. And I was sharing yesterday, so we actually have all the services together, but we have only one triage script just to facilitate. So can be a nurse or can be an OT or a physiotherapist or actually someone else that is taking the referral on the phone, and the script helps because you gather information. Then when you contact the patient, actually you know what you can ask, what they actually need or not. Because what we found is very poor referrals, as was mentioned by Joss, I think. And then you didn't really know what could be the help that patients will need. And actually the script helps actually being incorporated in EMIs, because it's there, and if you need any information, you can always change. It was really interesting because I was asked to help to do a little bit the script or the questions that we could ask, and we've been changing as we go along when you find that actually this is helpful or not. Another thing that I have is, because I'm also with the rapid response team, we have also referrals from the GPs, and then we contact directly the patients about their needs, immediate needs, because it needs to be within 2 hours. And it's really helpful to have a little bit the open questions. We don't have a script, we have some questions that we ask the flags, but really helps to center what really helps that GP also, but also the patient then. So, and sometimes it's the families. What we're finding out is, for example, patients discharged from hospital, mainly here in Bromley, because it's a very elderly population. The families are actually the ones we try to engage and self-manage, because of the isolation and this being apart. Sometimes we find out that actually the families are very far away from the patients, and is trying to engage them and actually help them to reduce the anxiety they have coming to help for example, the father or the mother. So I think it's a lot that we can do with the simple questions, but also just an attitude and supporting people to self-manage.
Thanks so much, Nis. Kay wanted to say something. Where are you?
Oh, I've gone off camera.
You've been there the whole time and you've just left.
Yeah. I just wondered, I don't know if there are any other nurses on tonight, but I was really impressed with the language that's being used. It's very light, and the catchphrases. When I do an assessment, I always thought those questions that I asked first, you know, what's of concern to you, how can I help you today? I thought they were very old-fashioned. So you know, getting to the things that matter to her most quite quickly. Then perhaps I'm not doing a bad job, but I do like the language that's used. But to sort of get to the important bit first, you know, what's of concern to you today? Yeah. But I've learned a lot about the language that I think I can incorporate in my triage. But there is certain information that I need to know as well. So I always start off by asking what's of concern, and look at the referral, of course. But then there is certain information I need.
I really like that, Kay. Thank you very much for that. And well, I really like what you said. If I can just say quickly, I really like what you used today, because we all, you probably as well as the practitioners, you must be massively overwhelmed. Like, oh my God, we need to do everything differently, and you have so much on, so much responsibility, and patients are as overwhelmed as you are. And because you use that little tweak in your sentence, not what can I do for you? Are you worried? But you said today, what can I help you with today? Are you worried about something today or this week? What can we do? Because you automatically, in my eyes, for me, it would work really nicely, because my big worry, you breaking down and you automatically shifting my focus on this unachievable, like I can start working in 6 months' time. That's massive. I really want to do it, but I can't. And I'm panicking. And because you said today, I'm like, actually, I would like to be able to talk to my family for an hour without being exhausted. How can I do that? And you are asking that very just differently, just a little tweak. And in the first session, of course, I understand you have to ask the other follow-up questions. But all of you, I know lots of therapists and doctors, and they can be very cheeky and very clever about it. So the really, really nice ones, they always put these questions, just 1 or 2 questions at the very beginning of their questionnaire. So I'm fresh, I'm not tired, they have my focus, I'm full on, I'm excited, rather than do a lot of these questions you really need to know, I get that, and then put these at the back. They twist it around and they ask them first. So they had my full attention. I thought, oh, they really like me, they're really interested. I can ask, I can answer. And so what you said was really nice for me. It really resonated with me as a patient.
Oh, thank you very much.
Really, well done, guys.
I think also just something I'd like to chip in with, if it's all right, is it's much easier to start with an open question and then close your questions down. So to start with the open questions and then move to more closed questions as you kind of move into your, I guess, kind of more of what your kind of more fundamental assessments are, rather than start from the point of closed questions and then try and open those questions up. I think that's just an interesting way to try and look at it, is to start open and go to closed, rather than starting closed and then try and open things up.
And also not think that you have to solve whatever they bring up. Like, you're not going to solve a pandemic. So if they bring up huge fears and anxieties, it's just acknowledging those and then focusing on, right, okay, well, given all of this stuff that's going on that we're all trying to cope with, what are those little things that you could work on in the here and now? The quick wins, as iPad 4 has said. Good old iPad 4. Kelly wanted to say something. This is her debut.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Just some thoughts, really. Exactly similar to what you've just said, Katie, in certain respects. But I guess my thought is really just how sad it's become. And maybe this is the time where I've just realised that how fear and risk averse that we've become as healthcare practitioners in causing harm and talking ourselves out of things, so much so that we have completely forgot about the potential huge risk of undertreating. And this just really highlights to me the sort of deep-rooted things from how we all have our training and probably who we all are as people. We want to help, we want to, see an end point and what we get out of it, and then there's this like really negative spiral that how we don't necessarily feel good about ourselves as practitioners if we don't fix something, and then we get this whole, and actually then we're making the patients feel worse because we're not allowing them to fix themselves, and it just feels like such an easy thing, but such a difficult and thing that would take so long. And also I think the other thing, and maybe this is, I don't mean this in any difficult way, but I think with the tension, with the stretch of the NHS over the years, I think sadly we have expected so much of each other as services. Maybe our patience and our understanding in that time we've taken to really understand and trust. I think this is what I'm trying to say, is trust as clinicians our intuition, and trust ourselves to have those conversations and not to have not to feel like we're missing something really crucial and that we might get in trouble for that. And actually really we've gone along that path because that patient's taken along that path, and that's the most valuable thing to them at that point in time, rather than we found out the height of their chair and we know exactly what chair raises to fit with it, just as an example. But I just this whole thing is just, this whole process has been really enlightening, and I think it's, I guess, so true to what you guys are exactly trying to say. But thank you.
That's really great, Kelly. Thank you.
Can I just say, Kelly, I think it's very important. All of you guys, what I picked up a little bit there is, I think you're all very hard on yourself. And I heard many times from my beautiful therapist to be kind to myself. And I think you all need to apply to yourself to be kind and don't be too hard on yourself, because you're doing a great job. So I think that's important.
Anyone else? Anything to add? Go on, Evie.
Oh, it's just going to get in there before Evie came again.
Guys, I have a question for all of you, whoever fences. I'm going to flip it on a hat a little bit. And following up Kelly, you voiced your fears and anxiety. And I think that was really brave and really cool. Anyone else, from all of you beautiful practitioners, have you got any fears or worries or something you might find challenging in doing your practice that maybe others are doing or find a solution to? Can you think of anything that we can share and maybe help each other here?
Maybe type it in the chat window if there's a few, or just go for it.
Can I just say one thing while just mindful of the time, but while people are just putting that in the chat, is to just say that there's really, really good research evidence that shows that you can get a behaviour change in somebody in a very, very short space of time. So the quality of that interaction, even if it is, you know, named as a triage, actually you can begin that process of behaviour change very, very quickly. And so I think that's really what we're sort of trying to say, and what a lot of you are saying as well. And Josh, you know, gave that example so eloquently, that it was possible to get that shift in somebody's understanding very quickly within a very sort of quick space of time. But it's about giving people the space to come into that space and help work out the answer together. So yeah, and there is good research evidence that is possible within a short, you know, within that first interaction. I have to say, on a negative side, it's also possible to close down somebody's ideas and opinions and you know, some solutions, potential solutions that can be closed down very quickly in that first interaction as well. So it can go both ways. Thank you.
Yeah, I've just noticed the time actually. You all have me enthralled. We've not got loads of time left. Does anyone else wanted to say anything verbally before we finish? No.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I'm Eilish Dignan. I work in Dublin. I'm a speech and language therapist. And just one thing, just to add, I think somebody mentioned it earlier about a mindset. I am very, very interested in solution-focused brief therapy. And so this makes Bridges self-management very attractive to me, because I think a lot of the things are quite similar. But, and I see Lucy Marin, I think your name there, because you wrote something in the blog. I was really impressed with that. And actually you, Katie, I was reading a couple of things. But just one thing that I really believe in is your mindset. So I think you can almost, if you believe in the competency of somebody and that they can come up with their own solutions, I think that if you genuinely believe that, I think you can, you know, any conversation is going to be a success. You know, you're approaching conversation in that way with the mindset that this person is competent. I just think that's very powerful.
Thank you.
Hey, I think we're going to draw it to a close there. Thank you all so much for using your own time and joining us this evening. It's really lovely to see all of you and to hear your thoughts, and I wish you well for the next couple of weeks, and I hope to see you back here in 2 weeks' time.